Good evening, and welcome to another edition of the High Desert Ranch channel. This is Truck Talk, and I am your host, Robert. You have to excuse the change in my voice. It's probably occasional sniffles. It is what it is. Just that time of year. Anyways, wild gyrations in temperatures and whatnot, and so yesterday we were hitting 70, and today we're back down into the 50s. Tomorrow we're going to be even cooler, and so, but we will take it because the Lord knows we need all the precipitation that we can get. Which is something that I want to talk about today, and it's going to be a little bit different than my truck talk. First things first, if you're new to the channel, welcome. I hope that you find this information helpful. Check out my other truck talk videos along with everything else. If you're coming back, thank you. I don't do this enough. I just need to give my thanks to you all. I do this for you. I don't do this for self-aggrandizement. I just hope that you can get something out of it, because I know we're all busy, and it's hard to get reliable sources of information, and I hope that you can trust me to be a reliable source of information. But I appreciate you coming along and watching this. It really does mean a lot to think that people all over the world, as I was looking at YouTube the other night, 15% of my viewers, at least according to YouTube, the analytics are from India, and then there's other people from other parts of the world too, but a majority of them are here in the United States. So welcome, wherever it is you're joining from. But I wanted to do a little bit different style because, again, I am super busy. I've got so many things going on now with it being springtime. It's the growing season right around the corner, and I'm trying to get some things with livestock. And if you're familiar with this, I'm trying to rebuild the family ranch from scratch. And so basically in a defunct status. That being said, I believe it or not, I know my productions aren't great, but it is hard to do a lot of editing and putting these graphics in and that like that. So I'm going to hurry and do as fast as I can, fire off some things for you. I'm not going to have the graphics and things up as I normally do, but Google search these things, which, well, even then it might be a little bit unreliable, or just take my word for it. I know I don't look as respectable as someone in an official news studio that sounds great, looks great, has all the fine trappings of a news reporter or things of that nature. But just know that the things I'm speaking on are things that I know to be true because they're either affect me or I'm seeing it firsthand affecting others. And so it's one of those things of I want to do something of consider this. That, and I'm wanting to say this because we hear about in history and even written in the Holy Word, like the Bible and whatnot, where it's talking about famine. And it's really easy to read these stories or even these accounts about famine and think, oh, those are for those times. That couldn't happen nowadays. Well, it is happening nowadays. There's a lot of spot famines, but could there be a general famine that could come about? So I just wanted to say this, and of course at the end I'll always leave you with something positive to go on, something to think about, and that you can do for yourself. But consider this, that the U.S. reserves of wheat, corn, and other grains are at their lowest level ever. It continues to go down further and further, and the thing about numbers is it can be very deceptive. And unless you know the context, you think, oh, that's not too bad. We're only 5 or 10% down from last year. Well, the year before was down from the year before, and so on and so forth. You can see that that couple percent doesn't seem like a lot, but cumulatively over the course of 10 years, it gets bad. So it's something I've talked about in another truck video. I even have the graphic, but know that last year, the production, the harvest wasn't what they projected it to be because of the drought and some other things. And something too that I've said before is consider this: China is buying up as much of those aforementioned items as they can. Not because they want to per se, or they're trying to be greedy, but because aside from the COVID scenario, which really didn't affect, well, it did affect food production in China, but they had a huge swine flu problem that wiped out all their herd in 2019. And then in 2020, they had some of the basically like 1,000-year floods all across their country, and then on top of the COVID scenario where a bunch of people were locked down, and when the government realized they weren't going to be able to feed their population, they were trying to force people to go out in the fields and work, and everyone was freaked out for one reason or another to go out into the fields and work. So China is buying up as much as they can, because they need to rebuild their swine population and feed their citizenry. They're doing as much as they can. Brazil, Australia, Soviet Union, and Ukraine, they're not exporting these kind of things either, especially the sorghum, because they can't. And this is even before this whole Ukraine-Russia thing. Is the Soviet Union last year said that they weren't exporting their wheat, and they're the largest producer of wheat in the world. Ukraine right behind them, China, and then believe it or not, America doesn't even make the top 5. Then you have Canada behind China. And so it's one of those things of, between the Soviet Union and Ukraine, they export close to 30% of the world's wheat. And especially now because this Ukraine-Russia conflict, they aren't exporting any of this stuff. And there's tariffs and embargoes against them. And so, consider this, that the U.S. wheat price doubled from 2010 to 2020. And from 2020 to the present, it has doubled yet again. So if you think the price of wheat is high right now, it's going to go up even more so. And I'm going to circle back to the wheat. But consider this, that Lake Mead is the largest reservoir in the United States. It is at the lowest level it's ever been recorded in the last 40 years since I've started keeping detailed records. And that's down 1% from last month, which doesn't sound like a lot, but the acre feet of that 1% is enough to cover all of LA proper in approximately 1 foot of water. So that, to give you an idea, go search out on the Google Maps. Lake Powell, the same thing. It is at the lowest level it's ever been in their 40 years of recording detailed records, basically since it really filled up when they built the dam. It took that long to fill up. And that's dropped another percentage point too. It's at 24%, which at 20%, it's considered a dead pool. Mind you, we are at the end of March, so we are going to start getting the spring runoff. But it's the fact that it's dropped yet another percentage point from February to March, both these reservoirs, goes to show that it's not looking good. The fact that also too, excuse me, Flaming Gorge, which a lot of people don't know about Flaming Gorge, do a little Google map search on that. That's on the Utah-Wyoming border, very far north of both Lake Powell and Lake Mead and Lake Powell. That's at its lowest level in 30 years. It's at 78%, which, again, it's one of the small reservoirs. It's only 3 million acre feet versus Lake Powell and Lake Mead are 28. Lake Mead and Lake Powell are 28 and 25 million acre feet, respectively. Massive reservoirs. But Lake Flaming Gorge is at its lowest level in 30 years. And it didn't get a lot of press last year, but they basically opened up Flaming Gorge and send as much water as they could downstream just to help replenish Lake Powell, and then eventually make its way down to Lake Mead just to keep it from dropping, the levels dropping so fast. Which they do this normally. They didn't do it to the extent that they did last year as far as opening up the amount of water they released. Basically going off previous projections that they would get the water from some of the ranges up in Wyoming. There's the Wind River Range, believe it or not, the river that comes all the way from the Wind River Range up in Wyoming, and it makes its way all the way down to Flaming Gorge. But a majority of the water for Flaming Gorge comes from the high Uinta Mountains in Utah, which go from east to west. They basically create the border of Utah and Wyoming. And those are, 13, 14,000 foot peaks. And there's no snow, basically, essentially, on the high Uinta Mountains. And so this water that is expected to be replenished into Flaming Gorge from both these ranges, it's just not going to be there. And so it's something that, it's one of those things of, it's not looking good, folks. Consider this, that the western U.S. had its driest winter, and parts of it was the driest winter ever on record, especially the last 3 months, January, February, and March. December wasn't too bad, but January, February, and March have been the driest on record in a lot of places that have kept records. I know here in Utah, it was the same. Driest record ever. We went 51 days without a single drop of precipitation. We got snow. We got hit heavy with snow on December 31st, and it wasn't until mid-April where we actually got some snow. And even then, it was only a few inches. So it is already turning out to be a very dry calendar year thus far. And so here in Utah, and we're at 85% of normal snowpack, and that's pretty much par for the course elsewhere. All these other western states are well below the 100% normal snowpack. But consider this, that's a 30-year rolling average. So if you have a 30-year rolling average, take this into consideration. 23, now we're going into, it's 2022. 23 of those years of the 30-year rolling average have been drought years. Basically since 1999, 2000, depending on where you're at, is when the noticeable drought happened. And so it's one of those things of, it's numbers again can be deceiving. So when you hear 85% of snowpack, that's basically all those years have been drought years. Realistically, we need to be at 150% of normal snowpack just to even make a difference, especially because even if we're at 100% of normal snowpack, considering 23 of those years are drought years and a 30-year rolling average, all these reservoirs are at the lowest level they've ever been in the 40 years they've been keeping records, and the population has more than doubled or tripled out here in the West. And so it's one of those things of, considering this too. Last summer, we're at some of the hottest temperatures ever recorded on record out here in the Western United States, North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, the Canadian plains where they grow a lot of wheat and canola. They had some of the hottest temperatures they've ever seen before. And they lost quite a bit of wheat crop and things of that nature, which is why the wheat production was much lower than what the USDA had predicted. California had the hottest temperatures on record ever recorded. And 25 to 30% of our fruit and produce comes out of California. And a lot of those reservoirs, like Lake Shasta, they're at the lowest levels ever too. And so a lot of these reservoirs are at their lowest levels. Lake Oroville got a lot of news attention because it was at its lowest level ever. They had to stop power production for millions of homes. And so it's one of those things of to consider this as well. Utah, Nevada, New Mexico, Arizona, Wyoming, West Texas, they had their hottest record temperatures on record ever too. And a lot of cattle comes out of these states. And so a lot of the beef supply. And things aren't looking good for this year. Again, like I say, I'm looking up at the mountains here, which if you've seen some of my videos, they're beautiful. I'm surrounded by anywhere from 10 to over 12,000 foot mountains. The snow is already very thin. It's thinning where I can see spots that I shouldn't be seeing here in March. And so if the trend continues as it has the last 3 years as far as precipitation, we're not going to have the snowpack to get us through the hot months, but we're not going to receive that rain to help with the range, pasture, feed, and even just growing crops, alfalfa, corn, hay, whatever it may be, sorghum, wheat, these types of things. And it's going to be the same in these surrounding states, Intermountain West, High Plains, Canada. And so consider this, that the Soviet Union and Ukraine, I call it the Soviet Union because the people are great, but the government is corrupt. And it always has been. It really hasn't changed even after the fall of the Iron Curtain. Anyways, they supply the U.S., these two countries supply U.S. with 20% of the U.S.'s agricultural fertilizer and home use, but I'm focusing on agricultural fertilizer. Last year in 2021, I purchased fertilizer for the fields at $400 a ton, which is up from the year before. This year, it is at $1,100 a ton. That is almost 3 times the cost. And that's pretty much par for the course anywhere. 3 to 4 times the cost. You're lucky if it's only doubled. But $1,100 a ton. Now, let me help you consider this as well. At $1,100 a ton, and that's what you do per acre, that's per ton for every acre, what do you think farmers are going to do? If their input costs are so high that they're not going to see them recover their input costs when they go to sell their commodity, whether it be wheat, grain, some sort of grain, corn, whatever it may be, what do you think they're going to do? Are they going to continue to plant what they normally plant? No, they're going to plant less. So what is that going to do to food prices, the supply? It's going to dwindle the supply and increase the food prices. And what they do plant isn't going to be as productive. So you're going to have more stuff going fallow. I'm not even getting into California. I've talked about that in another Truck Talk video. The millions of acres are going to go fallow because of the lack of water. Now you compound that with farmers not planting more acreage because they can't afford the fertilizer, let alone the diesel prices that have more than doubled since last year as well, planting season. All these factors, folks, are factoring in to what Biden said over the weekend to NATO, that he said, and I quote, "Food shortages are coming, even to the U.S., close quote. And I don't know if Biden's even considering all these other facts I've talked about. He's probably just talking about the interruption in exporting and the cost of fertilizer. But you compound that with the drought situation that's happening. I hate to be an alarmist, but folks, a famine is coming. And when you're in a famine, it's too late. The time for action is upon you. The time for preparation is over. And if history has taught us anything, I don't care if you study secular history or religious history through the Bible, once you're in a famine, it takes a lot longer to get out of a famine than the amount of time it took to get to the point of famine. So when I say the price of wheat is doubled, and it doubled again just in it took 10 years to double, and now it doubled again in basically less than 2 years, you have to ask yourself, how much is that wheat really expensive? What about sugar? Basic commodities, because it's one of those things of do what you can. Find out what it is your family likes to eat in a month and get your food menu for that month and go out and buy those items. If you can't afford some of those things, then you need to really look at your budget and consider what is all your outgoing expenses, just like a farm. What are you spending your money on? What can you trim? If it's a streaming service, cut your streaming service because you can't eat a streaming service. So once you get your month's food supply, then work on 3 months, then work on 6 months, and work on a year supply. Because again, when it gets to that point where, folks think that they go to their food comes from Costco or Walmart and McDonald's. It doesn't. Last year, I saw reservoirs around me drying up that had never been dry ever. Some of them were built World War I, World War II, and they completely dried up. When I drive up north to the big city, Salt Lake City, and I see green lawns and, water coming out of people's spigots, they hear about drought, but they don't think, that will never affect me. Well, it will. When you're left with the irrigation pond is completely empty and you're waiting on water to water the crops, not only for animal consumption, but for human consumption eventually, all you have left to do is pray, and then pray more. It's one of those things, folks, that, again, do what you can to prepare. I try not to be a downer. I'm a realist, but I see what's happening, and I've seen what's been happening over the last 3 years. Things have just gotten worse, not only here in central Utah, but regionally, geographically across the Western United States, and now the entire world. You compound all these other political, social, economic problems on top of the drought that's been building for the last 20, 23 years. And that's hard to recognize from year to year, but it is compounded exponentially over the last couple of years. And so anyways, that's my consider this truck talk. I know it was a little bit of a downer, but I will always leave you with this, that you only get so many trips around the sun. So it's up to you to decide what is important and to do it. Get after it, and I promise you will not regret it. You can never have too much food. I don't care if space is an issue, you find the space. You put it under tables, couches, sofas, in closets, under your bed. You do what you can, because when you've got that gnawing feeling in your stomach, it's too late. So get after it, and I appreciate you coming along tonight, joining me here in the truck for another edition of Truck Talk here on the High Desert Ranch channel.